Everybody from the Bowles-Simpson bipartisan report about closing the deficit to the Secretary of Defense is now saying, yes, we have to pare back on defense spending. You are one of the few voices out there maybe saying, no, don't do it at all. Why not? Why not cut the defense budget?
Because we are an under-defended, under-armed country. The real question is not how many dollars are we spending or if there's waste, but could we defend our vital interests around the world? What would we do if one day Kim Jong-il woke up, got tired of watching his pornography for that day and said, let's go to war? What do we do then?
Was Ben Stein channeling Irvin Kristol when he told fellow Israel apologist Elliot Spitzer that $700 billion isn't enough to defend America's vital interests? The presidential contender's proposed cut in U.S. military expenditure would, according to the godfather of neoconservatism, drive a knife into the heart of Israel. Jews don't like big military budgets, the elder Kristol explained in a Jewish publication in 1973. But it is now an interest of the Jews to have a large and powerful military establishment in the United States. American Jews who care about the survival of the state of Israel have to say, no, we don't want to cut the military budget. It is important to keep that military budget big so that we can defend Israel, he said.
What do we do then? What do we do if one day Ahmadinejad has one of his customary nervous breakdowns and decides he's going to invade Saudi Arabia? What do we do to protect our vital interests short of using nuclear weapons, which nobody wants to use? Wouldn't it be better to spend a little more and be sure we are safe?
Not once is Israel mentioned, but you can be sure that defending the Jewish state is never too far from Stein's mind. After all, it was Stein who called Ron Paul anti-Semitic for merely arguing that terrorism was a response to America's occupation of Muslim countries.
Look, if these terrorists are trying to kill the government of Yemen, we've got to help defend them. They're our friends. We can't just let Al-Qaeda run wild. If we try to stop them, that's not sufficient provocation. Why should we stop them?
Why?
Because they're terrorists and murderers, and they're very anti-American.
Why are they
should
terrorists?
We stop terrorists and murderers?
Well,
surely,
Larry,
Congressman, What do you think they're
Why are they terrorists?
They're terrorists and murderers because they're psychos. They're terrorists and murderers
they're terrorists because we're occupiers.
And murderers. But we...
No,
we're not occupiers. That's the same anti-Semitic argument we've heard over and over again. No, that's the same anti-Semitic argument we've heard over and over and over again.
Attack.
Look,
Larry, I think
one at a time, guys.
Are extremely angry and ready to blow themselves up because we have McDonald's and Budweiser. That's a nonsense argument, but it's the basic argument given to us by our last 4 presidents.
Why should we stop them?
Why?
Because they're terrorists and murderers, and they're very anti-American.
Why are they terrorists?
Anybody who's lived any amount of time in the Middle East begins to see the other side of it, I think.
They don't want to tell us that our sons and daughters are dying in order to support tyranny.
Look, Egypt is a dictatorship. It's been ruled by the military dictator, General Hosni Mubarak. Been in power he was put into power by the Americans in 1981, and he's still in power. It's a very hardline dictatorship that practices torture and all kinds of repression.
This is March 26, 1979, a date that is certain to go into the history books with the entry, Egypt and Israel signed peace treaty after more than 30 years of war.
The U.S. is terribly frightened what's going to happen after Mubarak.
For anyone to stand up in the United States and say that our support for Israel doesn't hurt us in the Muslim world, or our support for Hosni Mubarak's dictatorship doesn't hurt us, is to justify reality.
Israel has been colonizing Palestinian land by building settlements on that land. The settlements are in contravention of the Fourth Geneva Convention that forbids the transfer of population into land colonized by illegal force. The settlements are dotted throughout the Palestinian territories and are set up strategically, often on hilltops, to give Israel military control of the land and its natural resources, namely water. The settlements, together with the surrounding land that they have expropriated, control over 40% of the West Bank and Gaza Strip. The Israeli settlements are Jewish-only settlements, and they are linked together by a network of bypass roads that carve up the West Bank, restricting Palestinians' freedom of movement, and that simultaneously link the settlements to Israel proper. The strategic placement of the Israeli settlements and the bypass roads can be described as an Israeli matrix of control over the occupied territories.
Basically due to the misunderstanding about who's occupying who and what. I mean, in the American media, you could be left with the impression that the Palestinian occupation of Israel has been going on all this time, the poor things, and that, for example, in the West Bank, it's like the Jim Crow South over there, where these Palestinians are the Arab supremacists, and they won't just let Jews live freely in whatever neighborhood they want around there. It's terrible. And they just turn the entire thing upside down and inside out, so that the words used to describe the situation mean completely different things to different people.
Americans are a major party in this conflict, although we don't know it, because it is our financial and diplomatic support to Israel that is giving it the power to do whatever it chooses to do.
And in fact, Egypt as well is blockading Gaza and Hamas because Egypt as well views Hamas as a terrorist organization. So both Israel and Egypt here are agreeing that only humanitarian materials should go through, and both have a stated objective to prevent war material from going through over this border by land or by sea. So
what you're referring to is the Egyptian dictator that is the leading recipient of U.S. aid, several billion dollars a year, right after the Israelis.
We're in a deep hole because we're so heavily biased in favor of Israel. And the whole world knows it, and they're astounded by it. They can't comprehend.
Congress, which is very, very strongly pro-Israeli at the moment, 94 votes to 2 was the way a resolution was passed in the Senate the other day, wholeheartedly endorsing everything Israel is doing.
Mechanism of evil and destruction that Israel is using in order to implement its vision of a Jewish state comes at the expense of the indigenous population of Palestine. It costs a lot of money. You need a lot of weapons in order to implement that kind of reality by which the Palestinians would lose any right or any title to the land of Palestine, to their homeland. It would not have been possible to expel the Palestinians, to occupy what was left in Palestine, to build settlements, to resist peace with the Palestinians, had not the Americans supported Israel with money, weapons, and diplomacy. And it is the American politicians who are being elected that give the diplomatic support. It's the American taxpayer who gives Israel the financial leverage to carry out its settlement policies in the West Bank and the occupied territories, to carry on a very cruel, probably the cruelest occupation we have nowadays in Palestine.
And they asked me why Israel was doing this to them, why America was doing this to them. And I found it hard to answer their questions because I was so tired of telling people, Americans don't even know what we're doing to you.
The U.S. government has committed acts that are extremely unjust, hideous, and criminal through its support of the Israeli occupation of Palestine. And we believe the U.S. is directly responsible for those killed in Palestine, Lebanon, and Iraq. Due to its subordination to the Jews, the arrogance of the United States regime has reached the point that they occupied Arabia, the holiest place of the Muslims.
One of the big things that we've not been able to discuss in this country for the last 30 years is our policy toward the Israelis.
Americans are asking, why do they hate us? They hate what they see right here in this chamber. They hate our freedoms.
That's what our politicians want you to believe, that we're being attacked because we have women in the workplace and primary elections every 4 years for the presidency. If we were being attacked by people with those grievances, they wouldn't even rise to the level of a lethal nuisance. The politicians don't want to talk about the impact of our support for Israel.
Look, if these terrorists are trying to kill the government of Yemen, we've got to help defend them. They're our friends.
Dying in order to support tyrannies in places like Egypt, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and Algeria. Until we start to talk about those things, we are fighting an enemy, as I said, that doesn't exist.
We can't just let Al-Qaeda run wild. If we try to stop them, that's not sufficient provocation. Why should we stop them? Because they're terrorists and murderers.
Israeli soldiers say their actions are justified. They use suicide bombers, he said, we use tanks.
And they're very anti-American.
Why are they
should we
terrorists?
Stop terrorists and murders.
Well,
Surely,
Larry,
Congressman, what do you think they're
why are they terrorists?
They're terrorists and murderers because they're psychos.
Whether we want to be involved in fighting Israel's wars in the future is something that Americans should be able to talk about. They may vote yes. They may want to see their kids killed in Iraq or Yemen or somewhere else to protect Israel. But the question is, we need to talk about it.
They're terrorists and murderers.
They're terrorists because we're occupiers.
But we,
no,
we're not occupiers. That's the same anti-Semitic argument we've heard over and over again. No, that's the same anti-Semitic argument we've heard over and over and over again.
Attack.
Look,
Larry, I think
one at a time, guys. It's not a vicious attack.
Larry, I'd like to respond to some of these points.
Paul hadn't even raised the issue of Israel inducing America into those wars in the Middle East. Talk about a preemptive smear.